We can never seem to stay far away from sad topics for too long on this podcast, but I always look at them as a way to help this community prepare and heal from all the sadness that we usually suffer alone. So be sure to take notes. Welcome to the Just Dumb Enough podcast, a show that acknowledges no one is always an expert by dispelling misconceptions with real experts. I'm your host as always, Colton Petrie. My guest today is Jean Alfieri. Jean is also known as the dog author because of her numerous books revolving around man's best friend. But pet grief can come in all shapes and sizes, from furry to scaled, and it can be one of the hardest losses in a world where your companion might be the only constant. And if it's not obvious, both Jean and I have shed quite a few tears between recording and editing this episode, so don't be afraid to do the same. Tour dates for Japan are in the show notes. Let's celebrate our vintage pets. Welcome to the show, Jean Alfieri.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's so exciting to have you on the show. Why don't you introduce yourself a bit for the audience?
Sure. My name is Jean Alfieri. I go by the dog author. I am a writer, a speaker, and a dog fan. And I was for 30 years in human resources. I do air quotes and say I retired the end of last year because I'm busier now than I've ever been. But yeah, I have a new book out, and it's just another set of great stories. And this one, hopefully, to help people.
Well, and it seems to always be that way, is like retirement's never quite the relaxation people think it will be.
Exactly. And for me, I've been partly a coach, a career coach, a professional development coach. And through my research for this last book, I discovered that I could become a grief coach for pet loss, specifically for that. And I thought, wow, well, okay, this seems like a natural fit. And the course was really intriguing in the way of all the information I learned along the way. So yes, it feels like another evolution of what are you going to do next?
Well, and what made this feel special? Like, what made you really want to jump in, with both feet?
Yeah, I don't know that I wanted to jump in with both feet, actually. So my husband and I have, going on 2 decades now, been a family that rescues shelter dogs. And we prefer the old guys. We like the seniors. We call them vintage puppies. Last November, we lost Sally. Her name was Silly Sally. She was a retired Airedale. And I say retired in that she was a show dog. But she was 12 years old. She'd been battling cancer, and it kind of tipped me over. We'd had a stretch of 4 years where no dog had passed. And that's kind of a long time for us, considering, who we have in the house. And so I honestly got to say, it was with a very heavy heart that I thought about, you've been through this before. Not that I would expect it to get easier, but some things about this. How are you going to handle it this time? And so I got the notion that perhaps I know a few things that could help people. Because as I went through this grieving process yet again, I thought of other people I knew and other situations I'd been in where people had been struggling. And so that was when I started doing the research. And I decided that if I wasn't going to come at it from a very positive perspective, there wasn't going to be anybody that would want to read it. I had to do it with a happy heart. And so it was really a journey through this grief that helped me try to create a guide that people might be able to use for themselves, my fellow pet fans.
Yeah, well, and I've heard somebody say once that they're like, adopting a pet is like buying yourself time-delayed heartbreak.
Yes.
Because they're like, it's just guaranteed. It does never get easier. And you like bought into it and you're like, oh, I love this creature so much. And I know one day you're going to absolutely break my heart.
Yeah, I've heard that too. And it's interesting because when you consider what makes pet grief so hard, part of it is that it is really socially quite unacceptable to consider that a worthwhile grief. And that broke my heart when I acknowledged that, right? Because not only could I find that nothing further from the truth, but it's a bit offensive. If you're a pet fan, are you kidding me? You shouldn't have to. That's not a decent enough reason to grieve, but societally, it is really considered unacceptable for 2 reasons. One, it's just an animal. Ooh, that's so not true, but that's the perspective. And secondly, you can get another one. And they treat it like it's just, you just get one for the other one. And we all know if you're a pet lover, they're not replaceable. They're not the same dog. You don't, even in the same breed, you're getting a very different dog. So it's a very unfair perspective. And that's what makes it harder because people don't always feel like their coworkers are going to understand, or maybe even their family is going to understand. And you try to hide it and you try to push it away and you try to think, oh, I've gone long enough, whatever that length of time is, and it should be okay by now. But it's not.
Well, and I mean, you could look at that like there are many companies out there that will give you grievance days for distant family members,
Yes.
but you don't get that same allowance for a pet, which is tragic because there are family members I don't know that I could get days off for, but there are pets that I've spent, 12 years with,
Right.
and I wouldn't get an hour.
It's so true. It's so true. I've had the privilege of working for the Humane Society, the Pikes Peak region, and they do. I mean, animal organizations, I would hope, and I can't speak broadly, but would allow, and we have a special allowance for pet bereavement that calls it specifically. So it doesn't fall under the same category, but it is an allowance that we provide. And I think it's just wise. You're telling a person they need to be into work because this isn't an acceptable reason to grieve. And how productive do you think they're going to be when they're crying all over and trying to explain to their coworkers why they're disengaged or not focused? It is and should be considered a legitimate bereavement reason.
And it feels like maybe this is the harder one because you have to see it coming. Like, with people, my father passed like 6 months ago. And it was very sudden. Like none of us
Yes.
saw that coming. And yet with a pet, you kind of have to see it coming because typically, we put animals to sleep and not
Yeah.
like they don't just naturally die.
Right. Yes. And I will say on that point, there are a couple of other types of grief and anxiety. One is the preparatory, right? That anticipatory grief that things are declining, but also then the grief that comes with potentially if you are putting down a pet and did you do it at the right time. And I mean, I know my husband and I have laid awake at night, wondering, if is it the right time. I just don't want to do it too soon. And for us, it's been very clear. I received some really great guidance a number of years ago because I was struggling with this, right? You could see the decline and what do you do? And our vet, when I called them, I said, hey, here's the situation. I don't want to be selfish in creating this situation where this animal is now suffering. Of course, I don't want him to go, but I need to assess this and can you help me? And what they offered was on a calendar, on a wall calendar, every day at the end of the day, you put a smiley face or a sad face. Was it a good day for the dog or was it a poor day for the dog? And when you look over that over the course of a month or a couple of weeks, even it was for me, to see how many sad faces you had up there, it became very clear where we were trending. But I really thought that was great advice, and it's very difficult because people feel like they might be playing God, and is that fair? And that brings in a whole nother level of anxiousness and worry.
Yeah, and that's actually a really good idea. I've never thought about that, but it gives you some perspective from yourself to say,
Yes.
like, look, 2 weeks ago you knew that like every day was good, and now every day on the calendar is not good. That's fresh perspective. Because I was talking to somebody, I think 2 weeks ago at a live event, and they had said, like, yeah, I have a cat that's getting pretty old, and we had kind of set this hard line where like if they can't get up and walk with all four legs anymore, like that's time to go. And I'm
Yeah.
like, that's a hard deadline to set because you know that like it will occur one day.
Right. Right. And to your point too, I think for people, if you don't anticipate it and they pass away, that's one thing. Even if there's an illness, you have a chance to prepare. They can be involved with it, right? You know that there is a time if they're failing that it may be within, so you get to do things together. But it's not quite the same with an animal. And so yeah, especially as caregivers, it's tough for us.
Well, and I think that has to be the other hard thing is that, we don't think about like missing a day in a person's life because we live for so long. But
Right.
losing a week of time with a pet can be really hard because you're like, I'm going to go on vacation and I can't take my giant dog with me.
Right.
But I know like that 1 week is actually quite a significant chunk of time with them.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. And the care we take too, right? When you look at the things that we share with our dogs, if we are able to take them on vacation, all the better, right? All the fonder the memories. But then I would love to hear what you did, because when you don't take your dog with you, usually they are pampered beyond belief. It was so funny. I saw this short video of a person carrying this probably 90-pound dog out of grandma's house because he didn't want to leave grandma's house after the visit. They just touch so many people within our family, because even if they're not under our roof, people visit, we go visit, they're truly part of the family.
Well, and you can see like how attached they get to one person. Like my sister's dog, for instance, is 160 pounds, probably, giant Rottweiler. And
Oh,
he is the most neurotic, anxious dog. Like it's so funny. But he's like, he's this big goofball and he's loving. And then if my sister's gone for a day, he'll hang out with us for most of the day. And then when it starts to get late, he just like goes up and lays in her bed. And he's like, I,
oh,
I know she'll be back soon, but I really miss her. And he won't even be like
yeah,
around the rest of us. And
right.
you're like, you're isolating yourself. Come downstairs.
Yes, I know. And it's funny because with our pugs, we have a blind pug, and she specifically looks for me when I'm gone. And my poor husband's like, yeah, she comes up to me and sniffs my leg and turns around. I'm not the mama. That's what we call him now. He's not the mama.
That is what we've always said about my mom's dog is we're like, if there was a house fire and the entire family was in the house and that dog could only save two people, it would save you twice.
Oh, that's cute.
So, I mean, it's one of those, and I think that's, again, that attachment level, like you realize that's there, right? Like all of us
Yes,
feel that connection with our pets.
right.
So, how do you kind of put yourself into that like grieving modality to either know like it's coming up or, after the day has occurred? Like, how do
Yeah.
you kind of allow yourself some space for that?
Yeah, I think it's important to be around people who can appreciate what you're going through. If there was someone else in the family, and really to respect how it is that you go through it. I mean, it's okay to cry, right? I mean, you have to do that. And I'll tell you, if you have a veterinarian that sends, and many do now, sends a condolence card, if you get that a week later, you're starting all over again, right? Because now you're hearing everybody's gratitude for that animal, people who might have only known them peripherally, but appreciating what you're going through. And so that, and doing it your own way, which is why I created the book too. I mean, there are different things that people are going to take away from this. Some things they will never want to try, some things they will, but it's a gentle invitation to commemorate, right? Remember and honor that animal, because in a society who might, in a society that says it's not a worthy reason to grieve, people who get it understand it very much is, and it needs to be done. My husband and I are very different grievers. He likes to pack up everything and put it away. He doesn't want to see it. I want everything to remain the same. I want the bowl to be where it was. I want the toys to be where they are. I just want to see them. It makes me happy to feel that at least a little bit of what's the same. But we have to find a balance, and you might need to do that too. It's hard in families, especially if you've got a young child who might this be the first go around with grief, their first experience with death. How you manage that and how you display that to your child, how you demonstrate that will go a long way to what they feel is acceptable. So truly you have to consider what is the person's experience with death in general, and then with pets, and how do you, and that it's okay even if you've been through it like I have several times. It's going to hurt. Just acknowledge that it's going to hurt and take time.
Well, and it is going to be those reminders, right? Because
Yes.
you're like the email that says, hey, a special thing for your pet from Chewy, or, like
Yes.
it's just their standard marketing, but it hits really close to home when you're like, I don't need this anymore.
Right, right. And I have to say, if there is ever a time that there won't be a dog in this house, my husband and I have talked about it because when we retire, are we going to travel? Does it make sense? I'm like, you have to appreciate that I won't want to be here. When there's no one greeting me when I come in the door, this is going to be a place that I want to hang out. So we will have to be traveling or doing other things because when you become that accustomed to it and having that excited body of fur, looking forward to seeing you, whether it be a dog, a cat, a bunny, whatever that is, and then it be gone, that's tough. It is tough.
Yeah. Well, and I'm that type that has a hard time traveling because I love to go to tropical places. And those are usually the places that have what they call beach dogs, which are
Right.
just like, the strays that just hang out around people. And I'm like, man, I would adopt every single one of these today.
Yeah, for sure. And for me, working at the Humane Society, it was the same thing, right? When I got a job on staff, my husband's like, "You're going to sign this contract with me that says you are not bringing home every dog that you meet." And I'm like, "Okay, deal. I get it. I get it." And that was fair. And I did bring home one, but still.
Yes, I know a person like that that works with a veterinary clinic and with a humane clinic, and she has like seven. Um,
Wow.
and I'm like, yeah, you just couldn't say no, huh? Yeah.
It's true. I know. It's true. And it's interesting how many, right? We have a pack of three now. We had a pack of four. And for us, that was a lot. It's funny how that one single more pet can kind of tip you over going, this is madness. Feeding time is madness. But it's also such fun.
It also goes back to that, like, being the person grieving and being a person who can be there when someone's
Yeah.
grieving. Like, we're both
Yes.
pet people and we can respect that. But how I show up for you and how you need me to show up might be very different as well.
Very different. In fact, I talked to someone a couple months ago at a book signing, and she came up and wanted to understand, what I wrote and why I wrote it. And I said, and this is what I'm currently working on. And at the time, it was 21 Ways to Weather the Loss of Your Pet. And she kind of did the hard blink when I told her what it was about. And it's a guide for grieving and healing. And so I knew I hit on something. And she said, my granddaughter lost her cat 6 months ago and she's still not over it. And it was a little judgy. You heard the little judgy in there. And I went, and she just didn't understand. She truly, and I said, have you asked her what she misses the most? Don't ask her why. Don't ask her why, because she might not be able to verbalize why. She just loved the cat. I can tell you why. But what does she miss the most that might open up something that she'll be feeling more comfortable in talking to you about it? And you'll get a sense of why after 6 months she's still struggling. Because if grandma doesn't understand, it's very likely that perhaps she hasn't opened up to the parents, or if she has other siblings. It's tough. It's tough at any age. And she said, I'll do that. And it's true, Colton. It takes a village to raise a child, or to help each other, right? Where's the compassion? Where's the kindness when someone's going through something like this?
So what kind of things do you recommend? Like, what can we do? Either like showing up for that person and saying like, here, let's do something. Or,
Yeah.
in that situation where, maybe you can't open up to anyone about it, like what can you do for yourself?
Yeah. So let me offer to you one story. I was visiting a second grade class a couple years ago and answering just regular author questions. And, they lobbed me some softballs, and then they got the curveball when a little boy raised his hand and asked me if I ever had a dog that died. And I knew then, right, that this conversation was going to go a little bit of a different direction. And having rescued dogs before, I had something to offer him. And I said, yes. And in our family, the night that we have lost a dog, we go around the table and we share our favorite memories. And if you have a family in which this dog has touched different people, even if you just like don't normally have dinner with them, but you could host a dessert night or something like that, hearing those stories, because you always think as the dog's owner, you have the best stories, right? But to hear other people's stories is just so heartwarming. And we laughed and we cried. And so I asked the little boy if he had any special memory that he had of the dog or anything that he missed the most. And he said, yeah, she always waited for me when I came home from school. And my heart about broke. And so I asked the class if there was anyone else who'd had special dog memories, whether your dog has passed or still alive, any special memories, and a scattering of them raised their hands. And I said, well, maybe at lunchtime, you can tell Ben your story, and maybe it will make him feel a little better to know others have great dog stories too. And he nodded and said, yeah, that would be nice. So in talking to the teacher afterwards, I learned, right, that this is a gap. We don't necessarily are willing to talk about it, want to talk about it, but that's the first thing. If you've got a friend who's going through this, it's a nice conversation starter. If you're going through it yourself, capturing those stories, for me, it's hard when I think about losing all the great memories. And so if you journal, that's a great way. And journaling is just known to be from a capacity of mourning and grief, especially for like PTSD, any kind of aggravation like that you're going through, just to get the thoughts out. But to specifically have a gratitude journal or a memory journal of that dog, that's always a nice way to start moving through the grief process.
Well, it kind of strikes me that, we start talking about like, oh, the second grade class. Some of them might have dealt with the same situation, and a lot of them probably have not.
Yeah,
And, we realize like we don't prepare kids for this in any way, not for, family members and not for pets. And
right.
I feel like that's maybe the school system trying to like keep their hands free where they're like, look, it's up to the parents how you want to parent. We don't want to tell your kid how to process grief or prepare for death. But it's
Yeah.
also like, sometimes we might need that training because you might not have it at home either.
I know. And I delight in talking with teachers because it's usually a teamwork thing, right? It's the teacher, it's the counselor, it's the parent. And when I spoke to that teacher afterwards, she said, I'm really sorry. And I said, no, please don't be sorry. I know no one anticipated this question. And she said, but really what enlightened me was the fact that he mourned the dog waiting for him at home. She said, and I know the parents aren't home after school, but I don't believe that his grandparents live that far away. And maybe they could come and be that person, right? Be that presence when he shows up just for a little while, just to help bridge that gap and help him not feel so alone. And I love that. I hope I never did find out if that's what they did, but I knew that's what the teacher planned on talking to the parents about. And what a great, again, takes a village, right? What a great thing to consider when we're trying to help somebody else through it.
Well, and I know there's not going to be like a direct answer for this next question just because it's going to be subjective person to person, right?
Yeah.
But do you think there is like an easiest project and a hardest project? Because I know some people will probably be like, journaling, like that's my comfort zone and
Yes.
I'm flying through it. And some
Right.
people, like myself, are terrible journalers. And
Yeah.
I'm going to struggle like every day to get through it because I'm also going to read my own stuff and then make myself more sad.
Right, right. No, I hear you. And yes, I do think so. And it's interesting for me because I more tend toward writing to have experimented with these other ideas too, including artwork, right? So you can draw the picture of the animal. And for me, what I really appreciated about the creativity projects, there was a mixed media, there's gathering pictures, creating a small scrapbook or an ornament, something like that. It took more time. So for me, writing was quick and easy. I could just get it done. But these art projects take a little more time. And when done with other people, it allows you time to talk about it or why you selected that picture or what you're doing with it. And so when I did them on my own, however, I found it more thoughtful. I could just process it at a slower pace. And that felt like a relief for me. So I feel like there's bits of this that even if you try something out of your comfort zone, you may gain from, whether it be the length of time it takes to do it or, what you're feeling as you move through it. Some people, it's not anything tangible do they want to create, but at dinner time or when they would normally walk the dog, it's a struggle. And then they light a candle. I've suggested lighting a candle. And you're recognizing the time, right? So here's the space that you're holding for that pet, and so you're acknowledging it, and just in acknowledging it helps you feel better about it.
I could see that being really helpful if you're like, we, the family and the dog always had dinner at the same time, right?
Yes.
Like, we had that moment. And so when you're like, you've made dinner and you've dished up, you can just light that candle,
Yeah.
and you're like, it's an intentional motion instead of,
Right.
making the dog's food or whatever it might be, like you lit the candle. And when you're
Yeah.
done with dinner, like you blow it out. Now we're all done with dinner. Like,
Right.
you know,
Yes, exactly. And it's something too, especially for with electric candles now, you can have a child help you with. I mean, if there's a moment that we're acknowledging we're going to be, remembering what we used to do at this time, they can click it on, they can click it off, and that helps them feel very instrumental in the grieving process too.
yeah. Well, and it's something very cheap and easy. I mean, you can buy
Yes.
packs of tea light candles for $1. You can buy the electric ones in packs for $1. So,
Yes.
like, this is a very cheap and simple
Right.
option to just be like, yeah, that's holding space and it's totally valid.
Yeah. And it's important too to consider maybe you don't have an understanding yet of how long you're going to feel this way. But even if you by every month decide this is you're going to do something, and in a couple of months where you hadn't been lighting the candle, now you are going to light the candle. But if you find something every month to look at, then you can almost plan out for yourself how you're not going to forget it. And that is sometimes a relief because now you don't have to be worrying about that. You can relax and know that in 3 more weeks, I'm going to be recognizing this. If I don't think about it between now and then, or I do, I still have now this intention next month to do this.
So, I mean, in doing the author thing and writing this book and putting it out and speaking to people and doing all the fun events, have you heard like one thing that you've written about come up more than all the others where they're like, oh, this was my go-to?
It's been interesting that it's just been a variety of things. I feel like when people are prone to something, they're going to move towards that anyway. So there hasn't been any one thing. But what's interesting to me in people picking up this book is it is really less words and more ideas. So this one has fewer stories for sure, because it isn't about me. It's about you. And it's about how you're going to find your path and find your journey. But I liked that part of them included physical activity too. Go out and do the same walk, go out and do a memory walk with that dog, go out to where it was if you vacationed and, spread some ashes if you had ashes. And so there's a variety of things. When I look over my go-to, it's always been the commemoration at dinner. And so, whether that works for everybody or not, but to your point, right? If you like more creative projects other than writing, you're going to lean towards those. So I have not heard yet that you typically I like number 10. No, I haven't heard that.
Well, yeah, and that's what's fun is because it's like, again, everything is so personal because you're like, here's
Yeah.
21 plus, technically,
Yeah.
ideas in the book that you're like things you can do. And for people to not be like, oh, number one, two, and three are obvious, like those are the top hits. You're like,
Right.
no, all of them are hits. It's just
Right.
going to depend on who you are as a person that actually makes the difference.
Yeah, and I talked to a therapist, a psychotherapist, and a person who's a therapist specific for grief loss because I wanted to get an endorsement, right? I want someone other than myself to say this is worthwhile. And she was very gracious in offering that in her work, she finds just getting people on the path, right? And so that's what makes this book a bit unique in that it's an invitation. I'm not going to push you. Here's just a hand and a gentle pull to say, if you want to try this, see how it works for you and understand. I'll tell you, with Sally, a couple months ago passing, I probably did half of the things in this book because I was just struggling. I thought, oh, I'll do a eulogy. And I did. And I put it up on Facebook because for me, that was an easy way to let friends know. And I didn't have to make phone calls and go through it and start crying a million times. And people appreciated it because they knew she was sick. They knew she had cancer. And, it was a tough time of year to be sharing sad news. And so I thought, oh, good. I was relieved. And then the next day I felt all sad again. And I'm like, okay, well, that wasn't enough. Let's go to number 2. And so for me, it was just a progression of moving through different things, which again, kind of put it on my heart to say, why don't you share these things so that, it might make it just a little easier for the next person who's going through this.
Well, and that's what I really appreciate, like reading through the book, is there are some things where you're like, you can do this right now. Like
Yeah.
just stop and do it. And there's some things in there where it's like, you should probably plan this as an event. But if you are maybe that kind of person, like you could just do that now, although it requires some, some like supplies and
Yes.
preparation. like you could technically just jump into it. And so
Yeah.
I like that there's like, it could be scheduled, it might not be, you know?
Right. Yeah, and that was another thing I wanted this to be. You could read it cover to cover, you could just pick it up and open to a page. And in the first part of it too, there's those words, the affirmations that you can choose for the day to just come at it with gratitude, right? I mean, it is sad that you've lost a pet, but oh my gosh, all the great times, right? And all the love and all of the loyalty that that pet showed you. It's just they wouldn't want us to be sad, right? So you have to look at it from the perspective of all the great times that you were able to share.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about like anytime you've been really sad around your pets, if you're a big
Oh,
pet person, like your pet picks up on it and they come up to you and try and like do everything to
yes.
cheer you up. And so, putting that into perspective as well to be like, oh, they would hate this. Like,
Right. Right. Exactly. Exactly.
well, and there is something, in speaking, like you've been through this before, right? You wrote about it. You literally have a book that you could refer to for yourself.
Yes.
You're like, and yet it still hurts. It still takes an unknown amount of time where you're like,
Right.
months, years later, like I could be telling a story and all of a sudden I've made myself sad again.
Isn't
And
it
you're,
interesting? Yeah. I gotta say, and when you finally move through, right, the stages of grief and you feel like you're at acceptance and you think you're doing okay, and then a holiday comes up, right? It's Christmas and you had him in the Christmas picture last year and now you don't have him in the Christmas picture. It really does. It creates an internal turmoil. And so that's the other thing that people need to appreciate, whether you're a supporting friend or family member or the person going through it. You're going to move through those stages in not only different timing, but in different, you might revert, right? You might come back around for another swing. And don't feel badly about that. And don't feel like it's a step back. You're still moving forward. It's just that you now have to revisit this thing. And where are you in, like, for me, right? It had been a stretch of 4 years that we didn't have a dog that died, and then we did, and now here I am on this path. And talking about her, it's a tough subject, but if you can appreciate all that animal brought to you and understand that it is absolutely reasonable for you to feel sad in their passing, you're going to gain and move forward and be able to emerge from that sadness in a stronger way. I won't say quicker, but in a stronger way, because you do build up resilience, right? That's what it's about. How do you move through a tough situation with your resources and come out in a better place? And I believe the animals do that for us. They allow us to come out in a better place because they were a complement to our lives.
yeah, certainly. And I think we are more challenged today to like never feel sad again. And we are confronted with it more because, like, even my phone, and it hasn't done this because, thankfully I haven't been in that situation where I've had a pet die recently or in the last couple of years. But my phone every once in a while will go like, hey, you remember this picture you took? Here's a memory from 3 to 5 years
Yes.
ago. And it's just
Yes.
like, hey, just a way to remind you that, like, hey, you use this app and you take pictures. And I know it's meant to be like, oh, a little bit of nostalgia mixed in there. But if it
Yeah.
was like a picture of a pet I lost 3 years ago, like that would immediately make me sad because I'm like, why did you put a
Absolutely.
calendar on it?
I know. I'm right there with you. I received an updated picture from 5 years ago of our Chihuahua. He's 18 years old, if you can believe it. And when I looked at him at 13 years old, I'm like, oh, not so much gray. Look at how young he was. Like, my gosh. And it does. It puts things in perspective. It's like, oh no, am I going to start this anticipatory grief now? Because who knows how long at 18 he's going to last. But you're right. And if it would pull up a dog that has passed, you would. I love those memories, right? Because you don't take a picture that you aren't going to want to see again, and yet it tugs at your heart. It really does. It's hard. It is hard.
Yeah, I think it's just because like we have no control over that. Like it's just
Yes.
something that occurs in your
Right.
life and you're like, "Oh, wow, cool, thanks. I totally wasn't ready for that."
Exactly. Yes.
And that is like, something to speak to, I think especially with dogs because it seems like most cats probably have a pretty standard lifespan. Most horses, most turtles, like some things are going to outlive us. I know that from people
Sure.
that have like exotic birds, is they're
Right.
like, I will be passing this bird down. It will live through my passing.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
dogs, are a really wide range. Like if you have a big dog, 8 years maybe. And
Right.
if you have a very small dog, like you said, yours is 18. You're like, yep, still around, still fun. Like there's
Yeah.
24-year-old little dogs out there.
Yeah. You're right. It does. I mean, and like we said, the Great Danes are considered a heartbreak breed for a reason. I mean, 8 years old is a good old number for them, and they're such loving animals. It's just, it is. You have to consider too that you can't judge anyone else's choice of a pet as not being considered important and special to them. Rabbits, right? Can they be affectionate? Absolutely. And people say, well, cats, they're just not as affectionate. Okay, maybe. But you know what? When they come and lay on your shoulder while you're reading, that's showing you some affection. It's really preference. And that isn't to say that any animal isn't unique in showing their own special affection and love for their person.
And that's kind of the thing is that like you have a very special relationship with these creatures that you get to watch age, right? Like
Yes.
your animals that you can visibly see it. Like we don't do it so much with people. I mean, I do it with some of my friends where I call them like old or young or whatever, and we're like 6 months apart in age,
Right.
which is just funny. But like I do the same thing with my pets where I'm like, a 12-year-old dog, and I'm like, look at all your gray old man, and I like tease him about it. And he doesn't know that I'm like teasing him about it, but it's funny to me and everyone else around that's like, yeah, haha.
Yes. And like you said, even their energy level, they used to meet you at the door and now you get a tail wag from the floor. It's like, okay, that's all right. You just stay there. You know that I'm home. Yeah, it is. Again, our older dogs, I prefer just because they just make themselves at home. They come in, they pick a comfy pillow, they lay down and look at you like, tell me when dinner time is. And there we go. That's as much as it takes to acclimate to a new home. Sometimes. But yeah, there is something special about, and I know people feel sad, and I know people worry when their dogs are getting older. I just say appreciate them at every stage, and love and care for them, and let them do the same for you.
Yeah. Well, and it has that relationship to it that's very, close and intimate. My mother has a dog that from the time it was a puppy, like screams,
Oh, wow.
especially when it knows that like its people are coming home.
Uh-huh.
And so we would always know like when she was coming home because it would just like holler, yell through the house. We're like, is somebody murdering a pterodactyl downstairs? Like, what is that noise? And now that he's older, he's kind of hard of hearing. And so
Ah,
like he doesn't necessarily hear her coming in anymore. And so when we're around and she comes home, he like doesn't get up and then she walks in and then he yells like when she's in the house. And
yes.
we're like, you're so deaf.
But isn't it cute? I mean, we've had that situation too when one dog will start everybody else going, right? The doorbell rings, heaven forbid, and all bets are off. It's all crazy. But as they age, then not so much does the doorbell get their attention. I'm like, this is good. I will just sneak to the door. That's right.
Well, and that's the like introducing the young dog around an old dog. Like my sister's around my mother's was a very big experience because my sister's again that giant dog, he perks up and barks at everything.
Yes.
Whereas like my mom's old man dog didn't necessarily know it was happening. And so the little one would get the old one fired up over nothing. And now we're like, both of you settle down. There's nothing to even bark at.
Right, right. Yeah, and I'll tell you, that's, part of what people do too is they're getting an older dog. When the dog becomes older, they're getting a younger dog to help that puppy learn how to be a dog. And it's a great experience. It's a great way to go if that's your intention. Now, what's funny about in our house is we've talked about, right? Do we get a younger dog because then the older dogs can teach them how to behave? And I'm like, oh no, there's so much bad behavior around here. I do not want to get a younger dog learning all this craziness. So yeah, but it's true. It's interesting how they take after each other. They learn real quick what the dynamic is. And for us, especially around dinner time, right? Do you sit quietly and wait for the food? Oh, no, no. Everybody's got to tell you, how long you're taking, what you're putting in it, why you're taking so long to serve it up. It's hilarious. But yeah, and that's what makes it memorable, right? Those special times is everybody's got their opinion, and what your dog's thinking. You know exactly what they're saying, either whether they're looking at you or actually speaking to you. You know what's going on in there.
Yeah, you're like, I don't appreciate this judgment right now.
Yes.
Well, and that's the interesting thing. Can we kind of preempt like some of our grieving and maybe like cut some time off of it if we have that second dog around? Like we've, adopted the younger dog while we have the older one. Does that help to kind of lessen it just to know that like we still have an animal here for us? Like we're not totally alone versus, I know a lot of people like when their pet dies, they take, a year or two off where they're like, I can't adopt a dog right now. I just like, I don't have the space in my heart for it.
Right.
Like, does it help to have one around before the other one goes, or is there?
Yeah, and that answer is the same as most. It depends. It depends on the person. My husband would be somebody who would wait. I don't prefer to wait. And so I'm usually having to push the envelope there. And I say be respectful. But we've had some conversations where I said, this is kind of our thing. We like old dogs. And specifically, we had a dog come into our life. Her name was Sweet Lady Jane. And I was volunteering at the Humane Society at that time. And I'd seen her over the course of 2 weeks. Now, at our Humane Society, the dogs don't stay that long. They are out the door. We have a great community that likes to adopt animals. And so when I saw her there 2 weeks in a row, I went, oh, this isn't right. And 2 weeks I got to visit her. There was a man who came in the first week and he said, I don't want to adopt her. I just think she's a sad old dog. And I looked her up. I'm like, yeah, she is a sad old dog. Brindle, boxer, mix. And she just moved very slow. She was arthritic. I have no idea how old she was. They estimated her at 10. I think that was generous on the young side. And so she kind of, shuffled her way into the greeting room and one tail wag. She stood there and we both loved on her and gave her, pets into her soft ears and then, scooted her back to the kennel. When she was there the next week, I'm like, oh, this isn't right. She doesn't belong here. And again, I had somebody come up and said, oh, I'd just like to meet her. My friend's adopting a cat, but I have no intention. And I'm like, oh, please, somebody needs to adopt this dog. So I went home and I talked to my husband because we just lost another Airedale, he enjoys that breed. And he said, I'm not ready yet. And I went, but, and I said, come on. And he went, no. Okay. And so I went, a good wife wouldn't let it go. And I'm like, so I'm just letting you know, she doesn't belong in a shelter. And if anything, we could just give her a comfortable space. You probably wouldn't even notice she's here. She's really that nondescript, but she shouldn't be in a shelter. And he said, well, if she's there again next week, you can bring her home. I go, you want to go meet her? No, you just bring her home. Okay. All right. That was as best I got from him. And I know that he expected that dog wouldn't be there again for 3 weeks because no dog stays in our shelter for that long. Well, I went online before my shift the following week and somebody else had noticed obviously her lengthy stay because she was on a spotlight. Hey, this dog hasn't gone. She's really a beauty and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, I'm just going to go get her. So I went a little early from my shift and wanted to adopt her. And I realized she's about 60 pounds. When I went to put her in the car, her decrepit self wasn't going to be jumping into the back of my Outback. And so I looked at her and I said, if you just give me a little jump, she's a little too big for me. I'm like, I can get you back here. And she wagged her tail, up she went, right, and laid down with a groan. And I'm like, okay, honey, we'll get you home. There will be someone there that can help you out. And I told my husband, I gave him a call as I was pulling up and I said, I've got her. If you can help me unload her. I said, but she can't jump. She's too frail. If she jumps, she's going to hurt herself. And he said, okay. So he met us out in the driveway. And then when I opened the hatch, she jumped into his arms. And if there is a happily ever after story, she didn't leave his side. Her head was in his lap every time he sat down. She'd scrape herself off the floor to follow him around. She was his dog. And I'll tell you what, no lonely old dog anymore. And she had nothing to do with me and the other dogs, right? We were the riffraff. But we got her on some arthritis medicine and she lasted another 22 months and was just lovely. But sorry for the long story. It just depends. It really is about, what you emotionally can afford and what your house is equipped for. Because if you're really not ready for another dog, it's not fair to that dog to bring to bring them in. You have to be ready for it.
Well, and that speaks to like, some people are going to be hit harder by the passing of their animal because
Yes.
again, like that was his dog. Is you're
Yes.
like, cool, like I thought this was going to be a dog that would love me and hang
Right.
around me, and I guess
Yes.
not.
Right, right. Yeah, and it's just interesting how they pick us, I think. I've my experience has not been I've gone there to look at a particular dog and have ever come home with that dog. I've come home with different dogs. Reggie, our Chihuahua, I would never have selected a dog. He just came up. He was being showcased. So they were prancing him around and he came up and sat laid in my lap like he'd, been waiting for me all day. And I looked at my husband and my husband just shook his head. That wasn't what we came there for. And I handed him over to him and he shows up right in his arms, like he likes to lay. And I'm like, oh, that's adorable. And so we started looking through his paperwork and that was who we went home with. And it is interesting how they find you.
Well, because a lot of people have this idea that they're like, I'm going to show up. Like, I've looked through the local website, right? Like, there's a
Yes.
humane society not far from here. And every time an ASPCA commercial comes on, I'm looking at their website. And
Right.
so, like, there's a lot of them I look at and I'm like, oh, I bet this would be perfect. But if you show up, there really is like an energy that has to be matched because some dogs, you think you're going to love them and they
Right.
show up and like you two just don't mesh.
You don't connect.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And then this little dog or this big dog or whoever it is you least expected. And that's true with our first dog. I mean, God willing, there will always be a pug in the house because I just love pugs. But I went the first time looking for a boxer and I went through 5 different kennels of dogs. And in the last one, in, the last aisle, a pug made eye contact with me and I said, well, aren't you handsome? And the very quick matchmaker that was there said, would you like to meet him? And I'm like, okay, gets him out for a little while and I'm not seeing any other dogs here. And by the time we came back in 5 minutes later, she's like, I've got some history on him if you'd like to know. I'm like, no, I'm going to take him. I don't need any history. He's mine. In that brief little encounter, I'm like, yep, I'm hooked. So yeah, it's true. It's
Well, and
true.
see, you bring a boxer home later as you were looking for, and entirely your husband's dog. So you're like,
Yes.
well, I guess it just wasn't for me.
Right. Right. Yes, for sure.
Well, I think this has been wonderful, and we've given a lot of advice. Is there any, like, misconception or common advice that you like to, dispel or give to people when you have that minute with them as the author at the table where you're
Yeah.
like, I have one moment and I can say something here.
Yeah. It's okay to grieve and you really need to let yourself grieve because if you don't it's going to come out in other ways and other times when you least expect it. And although it may still, like I said, you may still repeat the process, you got to allow yourself the opportunity to. And if you know somebody or if there's a family member who's going through this, just open up the discussion and see where it goes because that's going to allow them to express themselves and to grieve maybe something they've just been bottling up. But pets are worth grieving for and they deserve to be grieved for. So it is absolutely okay.
Gene, fantastic. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your time. I want to make sure people know where they can find you and your book if they're looking for, either or.
Absolutely. So the book is online. It's on Amazon. If you want to find out more about me or that link to the book, you can go to dogauthor.com. So it's DOGAUTHOR, dogauthor.com. You'll find me there.
Fantastic. And I will put that in the show notes. If people pick up the book, please leave good reviews for it. I know that helps all of our authors as well as people who are looking for a helpful book. It's one of those that like people don't get on Amazon as they're like, oh, well, this book was really helpful, but it only has 5 reviews. Is you're like,
Yeah.
well, then you found it by the grace of some higher power, because unless it gets a certain amount of reviews or attention or purchases, people just aren't shown those books. Like the
Right.
algorithm kind of kicks them loose. And
Yeah.
so it's like, leave those things for the authors you really care about. Leave good reviews.
It's true. Yes. Thank you for that. Absolutely.
Of course. Well, Gene, thank you again so much for being here. I had a wonderful time.
Thank you, Colton. It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
If you've made it this far, do me a small favor. Post the name of a beloved animal that you have lost in whatever comment section this listening platform has. I just feel like remembering them is the best way to carry their memory with us. Thank you. No ranking updates for May, since I can't live track downloads until I'm back in June. So I guess that's it for this week. Have a great week, a great weekend, and I'll see you all back here next week for another new episode. Until that next episode, pretty pleased with all the things that help the show grow, like rating, reviewing, liking, and subscribing. Also, remember you can reach out to me at dumbenoughpodcast@gmail.com or on any of the social media pages if you want to reach me personally, even when I'm not in the country. But most importantly, stay dumb.